Okay, let's talk to some more folks about. Man, do you want to pick the next one here? Because we got a couple
I
different ones.
I do. You know, we had somebody respond to the chat poll.
Okay, yeah.
Jack does not believe that circumcision is genital mutilation.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah, we have a chat poll for those of you who are listening in the audio version of the show. During the live show, we have a chat poll, and sometimes we have callers respond to that chat poll. Today's was, is circumcision genital mutilation? Jack does not think so. Jack, you're live on Talk Heathen.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I saw the poll, and I don't believe that it should be considered to be genital mutilation.
Okay, let's hear your case. Why do you not think so?
I think when we compare male circumcision with female genital mutilation, in cases with female genital mutilation, it's typically like the removal of the entire clitoris. It's more akin to like being a eunuch, if that makes sense. Whereas circumcision is more like topical. As far as like it, I'm circumcised myself, so like I don't know. I like my penis. You know what I mean? Like I feel like it's aesthetically pleasing. And also,
yeah, you know, I wanna posit something. If I have all 5 fingers on my left hand, okay, if I accidentally chopped off the tip of my index finger, I would still like the remaining 3/4 of the finger. I wouldn't want to get rid of it, you know. So I think even though you still have what's left of your genitalia, doesn't mean that it was okay for somebody to make a decision to remove part of it before you had the opportunity to kind of make that decision for yourself.
Or figure out if
and
you're
so
going to be
that's
okay with it. Let's say you weren't okay
yeah,
with it.
yeah,
Then what,
yeah.
right? You don't really have an option to put it back on, right?
Okay, so circumcision also has some other benefits, like reduced risk of getting HIV or acquiring genital herpes.
Okay, well, even if that was true, I have one partner that I'm with right now that I hope I can stay with my life. So I'm not really worried about HIV and that aspect of it. But let's. I mean, there are other not benefits to it, right? Like you mentioned, it's a topical procedure, but it also reduces sensation, right? You don't have the same sensitivity there that other people do, and the fact is, I mean, the biggest problem with it I have personally that I haven't heard addressed is the choice that's involved, right? I don't get a choice in having a circumcision procedure done on me. Neither does someone who has female genital mutilation that occurs, right? You mentioned, yes, it is, and I agree with you. I don't think it's quite the same. I do think it's more severe in most cases, right? But that doesn't mean that circumcision is okay just because one is more severe than the other, right?
No, but you mentioned that because you have no ability to consent to it be done to you, that it's wrong. Well, like vaccines, we give children vaccines. They can't consent to that. Like as parents, we choose what's best for them on medicine, right?
Yes.
And we can argue that circumcision is not medicine; is genital mutilation. I don't see it that way.
Yes.
Why is it genital?
What benefits do I have by not taking the vaccine versus taking the vaccine? What is being taken away from me?
What?
What's being taken away? I mean, I agree, right? You know, there is some other considerations you can make. You can make a consideration with a vaccine. If I don't take the vaccine, I'm open to risks, right? I'm open to risk of infection. If I do take the vaccine, there is a very minuscule chance of vaccine harm, or I get but I almost always take the benefit of getting the vaccine. When I do get the vaccine, if I don't receive any harms that come from vaccine injury, which again is typically extremely rare, if at all ever happens. It depends on the vaccine. Am I actually losing anything? Right? I would argue that you really aren't. Whereas you're losing something every single time with circumcision. So I feel like it's hard to make that analogy.
Right. I don't think you lose something in the same. I don't see it that way. I don't feel like I'm disfigured or I'm mutilated because I was circumcised as an infant.
But you did lose something, right?
Yep.
Like objectively, you did lose something, right?
I mean, not really. Like it's a tiny bit of skin.
But you did lose something. I'm not asking whether its importance is high, just that you did lose something, which is a tiny bit of skin. And that tiny bit of skin can be the difference between how you experience sexual pleasure for the rest of your life. You know, I would argue that has large consequences.
I've had sex and it's been fine. Like I've had great times. Right.
And I'm happy for you with that. I wouldn't want to take that away from you, right? And I think that's the difference. If you have a desire later on in life to get circumcised for your own benefit, wouldn't you rather have that choice than have somebody else make that choice when you couldn't?
If there's more medical complications when you have circumcision later in life.
Sure.
Like, if there is a time.
Is there not medical complications in circumcision earlier in life? Can you not botch a circumcision? I mean, there's going to be complications either way.
Can you not get a vaccine and get the wrong kind of vaccine? And
so vaccine injury does occur. I fully admit to that.
I have a relative in the 50s was given the polio vaccine, and it was like the wrong kind of polio vaccine. Now for the rest, she's really old now, but she has like really skinny arms and muscular problems because of it. You know what I mean? So that happens too. I don't
know. I can't evaluate whether vaccine injury can be reported, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's the causal link, right? So when we have vaccine injury reports that are reported to local bodies and stuff, anybody can write that in. You don't have to have medical evidence supporting that you even got a vaccine in the first place. You can register vaccine complaints. So it's hard to evaluate vaccine injury. And there's a reason why we don't have a lot of information as to its reliability. There are some people, and I don't think this is you, Jack, but just for information's sake, for those listening, there's some people that do think we have a higher than average risk for vaccine injury because of the reports that come in. But there's no qualifications that you need to report for injury for most states, right? You could just kind of say one. So I can't evaluate case by case what happens with a vaccine. But what I can say is if you are making this point that, look, we vaccinate people and there's harms, that should make you on my side. That should make you on my side by saying, yeah, maybe we shouldn't circumcise people then, right? If we're going that route of, well, every single body should have the right to make decisions for their own body, period. Then circumcision as a child would violate that.
And I want to add something too, because while we're talking about vaccines and circumcision as a means of bodily autonomy, right? I want to get back to the example of mutilation. Like you're cutting up and disfiguring the body purposely, right? And I can relate that to our conversation on vaccines too. So, essentially, the reason why religious people circumcise their male children is to have some kind of covenant agreement, respect to God, right? But what are we really gaining from that? I mean, is that actually happening versus the vaccine? Polio, smallpox, in large part, almost 100% wiped out by vaccines. And so I don't think that there's a fair comparison when I want to consider what's better off for my son, right? Should I give him the smallpox and polio vaccines, or should I cut off the tip of his penis or the flap of skin around his penis? Are those equal? Absolutely not. They're not equal. I'm saving my son's life potentially in one aspect, and in the other, I am taking a choice away from him that he can later make. If he grows up later and decides, look, I'm a believer and I want to have this covenant with God in the way that the Hebrews said that we should, then that is by definition or by his right, the way that he should do it. But I should not cut up his body and disfigure it without his permission. And people want to claim, special pleading. Well, this isn't disfiguring. This is God. You know what? God has never shown up and done anything good for me, right? Let alone, I mean, if God wants to have a covenant with me, he should give me my skin back that he took from me in the first place.
Guys, I respect you guys a lot. I'm also an atheist. I don't believe that people should get circumcised for religious reasons. I'm saying that if the studies are correct and it does reduce risk of getting HIV and it does reduce the risk of getting HPV and it does reduce the risk of getting herpes and it does help with cleanliness and it can prevent phimosis and if it's aesthetically pleasing, whatever, I don't necessarily see a problem with it. And yes, you're right. Somebody can get circumcised later on when they're 18 plus, sure. I mean, but there are more complications the older you are. If there is a good time to get circumcised, it is the younger you are. And I really don't want to go down the rabbit hole of vaccines because it seems icky to me. I don't want to be like labeled a vaccine weirdo or something. But like,
well, you
that.
mentioned it. You mentioned it. We just want to oblige. That's all. You know.
I totally understand that, Jack.
I just want to make that clear. Yeah, I just want to make that clear. But like,
if the studies are accurate, right, that let's say that you're right, there are health benefits to circumcision, risk, you're less likely for HIV, you're less likely for herpes, you're less likely for these things. There are some objections to that, but for the sake of argument, let's say that this is true. There are also other methods by which you can prevent those things, namely condoms, right? Namely, other types of antibiotics and medication that you can take. I mean, there are alternatives besides making a life, quite frankly, life-altering choice, right? And while it may be aesthetically pleasing to some, it's not going to, it's an American sentiment, I think, for the most part. There are other countries that do not have practices of circumcision that do think the way that a lot of Americans look are weird, right? That I think that's a cultural thing. At the end of the day, I'm going to want to lean on the side of people being able to make their own choices for themselves, as opposed to having that done for them and then having to wonder later in life, well, what if things were different? And why couldn't I done, have had things differently if I was born somewhere else? Because for the vast majority of people that are not circumcised, they're not getting herpes and they're not getting HIV and they're not experiencing all of these potential ailments. They are living, presumably normal sex lives. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's my take on it, Jack. I'm not sure if I could elaborate more than that. What do you think, Jimmy?
Yeah, I think I agree with you there, and I really appreciate Jack's call. And Jack, I appreciate you saying that you respect us a lot. That goes without saying. There's no ill will here. So we might get a little passionate or something, especially me. But I'm not disparaging you in any way. So I really appreciate the contribution and the call, and keep following us, keep watching, and keep calling in.
Yeah, we do have to let you go because we got to talk to some other folks. But it was a good spirited debate, and hopefully we made our points clear. I think Jack is making the most reasonable case you can personally for circumcision. I do. I just don't think it's good. The case is good enough, and that's nothing on Jack. I just don't think the case is demonstrable enough. Is it complicated? Is it a little sticky? It is. I think it's stickier than most people give it credit for. But I still err on the side of, look, this is something that by and large is going to be something that you're not going to regret. I think the regret for getting circumcised is more so than the regret of not getting circumcised. I'm not sure if I have ever heard of a case of anybody saying, man, I was at risk to this thing, and if only I was circumcised, that could have prevented it. I just don't think people think that way. I think it's more of a case of, man, I had this procedure done with me without my consent, and now I'm never going to know what it was like having it. I think that's the more common response, right? What do you think?
Yeah, and you know what? It sets a dangerous precedent because we really need to redefine bodily autonomy in general.
Yes.
So if we have this precedent taking place that parents are allowed to remove parts of their children's bodies or alter them in any way, that where do we draw the line? At what point do we start giving people the right to make decisions for their own bodies? And
yeah,
I think circumcision is a very worthwhile conversation to have amid the other swath of conversations we're having about bodily autonomy.
Yeah, and that's like talking about vaccines, right? That is, like, anti-vaxxers will make this point very clearly, which they say, well, like, you are violating the bodily autonomy of children, right? And it's like, okay, well, it gets very messy there, right? Because you are making children sometimes without their consent. Sometimes they have assent. Sometimes they are okay with it, but that it's not the same thing as consent, right? There's different language that's been developed around that. But that's neither here nor there. I think we've made our case as much as we could.